Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? It is April when you're hearing this. Is it fully springtime? Do you have tulips where you live? I love tulips. I like flowers. I'm not even sure to tell you what today's episode is about, what my intention was, and I don't know if we accomplished it or not, so let me know, was to talk about what unmasking looks like, and if you have a PDA profile, Pervasive Drive for Autonomy, also called pathological demand avoidance, how we really want ourselves to have autonomy, but that's also a value that we have for other people. And what do we do when we bump up against narratives? And for me, one of my narratives is that I'm picky, I'm controlling, I'm bossy, and how that was showing up in some relationships. And as Jen and I talked, that wasn't her perception. And I'll tell you a little bit more after you listen to this episode about what happened when we were done recording. But so much of unmasking, oftentimes people that are suspecting they're autistic, they self-diagnose, they have a formal diagnosis. And you don't have to be autistic to enjoy or appreciate this episode, but I just want to name, for those that are autistic that are looking for some identification and connection, when we learn about masking, then we wonder, who am I if I don't mask? And who is my identity? And how do I unmask? And that's part of what we talk about in this episode. I think it comes together. Not 100% sure. But we talk about embracing who you are. And I had something come up that I don't know that I can let go of, although I will talk about this a little bit more when you're done listening to this episode. So I think I'm just going to leave it there and let you listen to the episode. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hello, my dear. I'm chuckling because you know exactly how I am, and I'm not sure it's fit for our listeners today.
It is not. You're having some painful medical conditions that we will not be discussing.
No, but will be ever present in my head and in my body while we record this. But
I know.
Thank you. Other than that, I'm okay. Life is full, but I am riding my waves. How about you, my friend? I welcome your
I see your and I raise your It's funny, really, there's nothing going on, and a couple minor things happened this morning, and it really set me off. And I was leaving you a polo before we were going to record. And I think I want to talk about these little things, and I'm stuck with that dilemma of how to talk about it without making anybody wrong. And I think specific examples help people, and I'm not sure that I can do this without making it sound like, you know, everybody's doing stuff that's making me uncomfortable and unhappy. But as you and I were chatting before we hit record, we were talking about this narrative that I have about myself and my family. And then I was sharing something with you and I'm like, I did it again, where I just have this narrative. And I've been talking a lot to people about what unmasking looks like. And I'm almost wondering if the bigger subject here isn't about unmasking. And when we get clear about what we want and what we need, and that it brings up feelings of being selfish or inconsiderate, because masking is really about making ourselves fit into whatever is going to make the other person feel comfortable. And when we start recognizing that these things are not comfortable and we need to be more authentic, it can bring up things in other relationships, and that can be uncomfortable.
Well stated. I love your commitment to not make anybody wrong, right? And just to see multiple perspectives. I know that one trips me up a lot with the ways in which I mask, right? And it's like, what's motivating the masking? Like, what is this in the service of? And I grew up, I call her in parts work language, it's like my 7-year-old Catholic schoolgirl, you know, who was really very well trained. I'm using the phrase lately, there's lots of different ways to say it, but of setting herself on fire to keep other people warm.
Right.
Right. And the minute I'm not doing, so that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of fits into your definition that you're talking about with masking. It's like, let me make sure I can pull that off socially, what that looks like. Right. And then when I don't, I feel wrong or bad.
Right.
Or, I've been struggling with this for months now. I have a boundary. What's okay with me? What's not okay with me? Someone doesn't like it and they unfriend me or something. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm wrong. And then it's really, when you've helped me with this so much, just to be able to recenter and just be like, you know what, it really is okay. What's going on for other people gives me information and data about them. Right. Not always information and data about me and what I need, and my needs are valid, which has been it's been such a fun lesson for the last couple of years.
Right. Well, and when we have this idea that if my belief is I show up and I can be friends with everybody, even as relationships shift and change, and then somebody unfriends me, unfollows me, blocks me, that's a reflection of me. And part of what you and I talked about is with my PDA, I often have to unfollow people because that sense of loss of autonomy when I had somebody that we had a relationship and they wanted to make a change in the relationship. They didn't say they want to stop being friends, but the way we were communicating, they didn't want to do that anymore and they wanted to focus on another aspect of their life. But from my perspective, it felt like a tremendous loss of autonomy. And I needed to unfollow them on social media because their stuff would come up in my thread. And every time I would see them, it made me feel like I had been rejected. I didn't have a sense of autonomy. So I also understand that like people have to do what they need to do so that they have that sense of control, because my lens is I want as much freedom and autonomy for myself, and my value is I want that for other people as well.
Yes. I think that's a great reframe. Right? Is that not to become entangled in that. If that's what you need to do, if that's what someone else needs to do, again, that's information about them, right? That's information. And that can be upheld and not to make it about me. I'm remembering the podcast we did about, I forget if it was the overarching theme or if it was just one like thread of it, was like what it really means to be emotionally available. Right. And I think part of that is knowing who you are, being centered, being grounded, and being able to see that really, so you're not making anybody right or wrong, and you're not getting into this like tug of war over that. Because usually it's, sorry, my brain's going in a couple different directions. I'm reminded of like what Marshall Rosenberg says about how our language is a language of kings, and it's built into our language who to praise and who to punish, right? And so it often feels like there's this one person's right and another person's wrong, as opposed to you're just both having these very different experiences informed by your histories, and you're bumping up against each other. And sometimes it's a vibrational match. Other times it isn't. Let's give that some space. And can we get curious, kind, compassionate, understanding? And can it not always be about us? Like that's the emotional availability. I have space to see what your life is like, or at least try to, because of course we can never 100% understand.
Right. I'm struggling because I don't know how to talk about what we're going to talk about without making it sound like I'm making people wrong. So I'm just struggling a little bit.
Can I help with that?
And trying, yeah.
Maybe if it's, I could try to, I don't know, and I mean, there's times where neutrality is not what's needed, right? And we need to stand within our viewpoint. So it's not like, I think it's flexibility. I think it's the ability to kind of come in and out of that. But maybe, I don't know, everything we do is an experiment, right? Maybe as you're talking, I can gently, because that's like also where we can, like we want to validate our own perspectives and other people's perspectives, and just kind of keep this little awareness that there's another, it's almost like camera angles or points of view, right? That there's another, if I was standing on the other side of the room, it would look different.
Yeah. Well, maybe that first example, and maybe I can just trust that it will all tie together, or it won't. And at the end of this episode, you'll go, what the heck? What was that about? And I'll go like, yeah, you're right.
We don't have anything in the trash bin file. We have managed to publish every episode we've ever recorded. So I always say like, maybe this is the one.
I know. And then I say, I rebuke you. And if that offends anybody, I apologize. And this is really reminiscent of what happens When I am sitting in session with clients, and I also feel this when I'm in my own therapy, but I trust it, so I don't need to name it in my own therapy, that I will consistently have clients apologize saying, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. And I'm like, it's fine. And what often feels like all over the place to clients is just unloading or offloading the things that are going on. And I almost always see a cohesive thread in that. And because my tasky part feels like I want to deliver on something for the podcast, and I'm not trusting that I can just talk about these things. And that's really what happened when I was sending you that poll of just, I started out like, this is the complaint department. And there is a cohesive thread, but I do have this sense of responsibility to the listener to deliver something that feels cohesive. And maybe this is the one that won't be. And I do feel concerned because I'm still in the middle of this of feeling like, rah, 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 rah. But I'm just going to go for it. The first example is my husband just got back from being gone for 8 days, and we have my son's dog now too. So Steve took the dogs to dog park yesterday. Actually, even backing up before that, I was supposed to go to Aquafit in the morning, and Steve got ready to take the dogs, and then I got dressed for Aquafit and it was canceled. And Steve asked if I wanted to go to dog park, but I needed to shower and clean up, and I felt like the dogs were running around wild, really wanting to go. And I wanted to go, but I hate having people wait for me, and even worse, the dogs, because they were just getting ready to walk out the door. So Steve went, but I also have this thing about bringing water to dog park because I don't want the dogs to get giardia. So you're going to hear what my values are, and some of this is related to my autism, and I'm suspecting that I have some OCD, which I really don't want to be talking about, but if it's here, let's just name what it is. But I don't want the dogs to get giardia. I don't want to pay to get the dogs treated for giardia. That's just where I'm at. And so the best thing to do is to bring your own water. And he wasn't going to, and he decided to. And I took a shower and then got out of the shower and was thinking I was going to go meet him at dog park because I just thought it would be nice. And then I saw the water bottle on the table. I know it wasn't intentional that he forgot it. So I go to dog park, and I have very specific things that I do with the dogs when we're at the park. And Steve and I are just really different. And before we get ready to leave, I always put them in a sit, and I walk away from them, and I make them sit as I walk away towards the gate where we're going to leave. And then I recall them. I just think it's good for them. And I don't think that Steve does that, which he doesn't have to do things the way that I do. When we went to refill the water bottle up, they have lots of dishes of water there. And my son's dog, Zeke, was going to drink the water. And so the command that we use is leave it. And Steve was going, Zeke, 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 no. Because there were lots of dishes. And as we walked away, I said to Steve, I prefer to use the term leave it because when we use this name, we want it to be a good thing. When he hears this name, good things happen. And I didn't mean it as a criticism, but it's just what my belief is. And the reality is, if Steve takes the dogs to the dog park, which he does regularly, and I don't go with him, the dogs are fine. If they drink the water, if they get giardia, we'll deal with it. He's been doing this on his own. And I was talking with a client yesterday about parenting, and it's a very similar theme that this client can see things happening in their children that their partner doesn't catch very quickly. And so even though my client feels incredibly overwhelmed with parenting and has a hard time handing off parenting and is not getting a break and is in burnout, because they catch all these things, they're also not allowing whatever to happen because they see things that their partner doesn't and that their children need before it gets to go too far. And I think this is really common when you're autistic, if you're neurodivergent, that we recognize patterns, we notice things that other people don't. And this ties into this overall theme of the narratives that we have about ourselves. Because as Steve and I left dog park, I said, if I were you, I would feel really annoyed that I'm imagining if I'm Steve, like I take the dogs to dog park and nobody's criticizing me. And then you show up and you're telling me, how to take the dogs and how to recall them and what to say and what to do. And he seemed kind of surprised and curious about this, and it didn't really seem to rub him the wrong way. But I said, this is why I don't like doing things with other people. This is why I don't like being watched, because for me, Patricia, giving my husband what I think are helpful and meaningful tips on how to be with the dogs, if somebody were doing that to me, I don't know that I would welcome that. And so being able to see this from both perspectives, and he seemed to be fine with it. But I had this awareness, and this kind of fits into this narrative that I have of I'm picky, I'm controlling, I want things to be my way. I do believe that with my autism, I have beliefs about how I think things should be done and systems and things that are familiar. Even things like when I take the dogs out, the term that I use when I take them out at night is go potty. And Steve always says, go pee. I'm not going to correct him. I'm the one that thought about what term I wanted to use. And in my autistic brain, that's not accurate. That is not accurate, because what if they have to do something other than pee? I haven't said anything to him, but these are things that I bump up with. And oftentimes I'm able to say something. It's also a little challenging sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't bother Steve, but sometimes he gets apologetic, like he's done something wrong. And I struggle with not wanting to be critical. How do I just give information? When do I not say something? When do I sit with it? And not having that narrative of being the one that's always saying something. And if you're the one that has extra neural connections and your brain is constantly filtering 40% more information than somebody who doesn't have a brain that's wired than yours, that's a lot of information to think, to see, to feel, to process, and then to not say anything when somebody else is just not aware of those things. And I think often what I've thought of as Steve as being easygoing is that things just don't even enter into his consciousness, and where I'm seen as being picky or anxious or harping on things, his awareness around what I think is certain self-care is just not even there. And why is it that the narrative is around my behavior and not around his behavior, or just not even having a narrative, but just more explanatory information about how we are different?
That is a great question. You know, you can't not be you and not filter the world the way you're filtering it. So it makes sense to me that, you know, your orientation point is your behavior, your thoughts. You have so much more insight into that, right? And that is what you have to share with Steve in your relationship, right? So of course it's going to feel that way. I mean, hopefully his version is the, the mirror image of that, right? I also want to say, I'm not hearing any of that like good guy, bad guy stuff. Like I'm hearing a ton of perspective, high level of processing, right? Verbal processing, like just what's going on. I'm like that, and that's kind of one of those things, like you're either like that and you enjoy it and you get curious about it, or you're not like that and you're like, what are you talking? Like I have had intimate relationships that were like, well, why are you doing this? and that's okay. That's okay. I might not be your person then, because I kind of can't help it and I enjoy it, and it's part of what helps me feel safe, right, is to process at a really high level. But I did want to point out, like, that thing that when we started that you were worried about, I didn't see it at all.
I got tearful when you said that.
Just now?
Because I think that I really have this very ingrained belief that I'm critical, I'm controlling, I'm demanding. And I don't know that I recognize the difference between it's okay to say something and that doesn't mean that I'm demanding. And when Steve and I were coming home, he said, I'll try and do those things in the future. And I'm like, you don't have to. The dogs will be fine if you don't, and you don't have to do them. And I think that's part of what is sometimes challenging to me, because I feel like he hears it as, in my world, I would love everybody to do everything the way that I want. That would be ideal to me. However, I recognize that's totally unrealistic and that's not my expectation. But I think when he says he's going to change how he does it, that's not really my intention. And how do I navigate when we're together and not taking over? And I did say to him, like, the dogs will be fine. And if you give them water when he wasn't going to take the water, I'm like, and let me just tell you that if they do get Giardia, you're going to hear about it from me. And I'm willing to let it go beyond that, because I know he forgets the water, and every time a dog drinks from a public place doesn't mean that they'll get Giardia. And the way that I'm wired is, it's not worth the risk.
Yeah. Well, I know how much things have been helpful in our friendship to just name stuff and what a gift it is. Like, it's a gift of intimacy, right? Into me, you see my inner workings, you see the way my mind works, and you're sharing that with your partner. There's also an act of love to hear something from your partner and be like, oh, let me see if I can make that adjustment. And then again, if it's not on the radar, it's not on the radar. And we don't make someone wrong about that, depending on the level of importance. Some things, like you're saying with the dog and the water bowls and all of that stuff. I know some conflicts feel a little bit more intense or immediate. I remember having a conflict about children being buckled in car seats kind of stuff and losing my mind a little bit. But the commitment to being honest and open, non-adversarial, you're sharing. So what this has me curious about is like, where in your history were you reflected in someone else's perspective on you? Was that by being a high verbal processor and wanting to talk about and wanting to share these things? Because again, the reverse PDA is I'm going to affirm everybody else's autonomy too. I want you to make the choice for yourself. I want you to want to. And if you don't, I mean, we know like Steve does a ton of things that are not in your wheelhouse, that you're not interested in doing, that he's great at, that he's tuned into, and so it's like, I'm sure he has a version of this story too. But back to what I was saying about the mirrors, because this is something I've really been working on a lot with myself, is you got what I'm going to consider a distorted reflection in a mirror, right? So you look in the mirror and maybe it's warped or it's dirty or parts of it are missing. But what that reflected back to you is the feeling that by having a preference for how things are done, that you were making a demand or that you were being unreasonable or that you were always nitpicky or anxious or, I remember getting this from my kids. Oh, you're such a worrywart. And then for a while there, I was too positive, where I was. And so these were reflections, but instead of taking it as some information about the mirror combined with our our picture of ourselves, it's just, oh, this must be me. Instead of being a little critical of like the source of where that's coming from, so if I made a choice of what's okay with me, if I was reflected that I was being selfish or I should always give, that's the whole like light yourself on fire to keep the other person warm. Don't put your needs first. In fact, maybe don't even forget that you have any of them. Those all came from messages and mirroring. Or I feel like we're just surrounded by that from other people. So when it makes this, and to me, it's the sensation, it's the getting tearful when we hear the truth. That's actually not necessarily the opposite, but hey, I'm not hearing that from you, that you're making someone else wrong or that you're browbeating or trying to be overly controlling. You're sharing yourself and you're sharing your perspective and your thoughts. And part of being neurospicy here is having this associative brain that just connects everything all the time. For better or worse.
Yeah. It's still very muddy for me. What I was thinking about is on the continuum of being concerned about things and being unconcerned about things, it feels like I'm on the very concerned side of things, and Steve and one of my sons is on the very unconcerned side. And often when I bring things up, it feels like I'm being perceived as being the worrywart, the cautious one, the thinking about things that they're not. And I think both are true. Another example that happened this morning is Steve was getting ready to golf. And I just said, do you wear sunscreen on your face when you golf? And he's like, only if it's sunny out. And I'm like, well, it's really not about the sun. It's about the UV rays. He says, well, the sun's going to be out today. I'm going to wear sunscreen. So I was raised where like, you just don't say anything, that's being pushy to even said what I said. And then I was thinking and I said, I'm going to be direct with you. You've had skin cancer twice. He's had skin cancer on his face, surgically removed twice on his nose and his neck that I spotted. Did he notice that anything was changing, growing? No, of course not. Did he think it was anything? No, of course not. Did I encourage him to go to the dermatologist? Yes. Was it skin cancer? Yes. Was it removed? Yes. So I have these skills. And I said, the fact is you've had skin cancer removed twice. You might want to wear sunscreen moving forward since you know that you have it. Now, chances are the damage has been done from years ago. We don't know what will change if he wears sunscreen moving forward. But given his history, it's probably not a bad idea. I mean, yes, there are things about what's in sunscreen and, what's better or worse. And so I'm not getting into that debate because that's another debate we can go into. But again, I felt like I was being pushy. And he's just kind of a person that is just going to do... He went away on vacation for 8 days and he thought it was going to be cold there and he brought 2 t-shirts. And when he came home and told me this, I'm like, did you get any t-shirts while you were there? He's like, no, it didn't occur to me. I'm like, you can also like wash your t-shirts in the sink and just hang them up. Didn't occur to me. And so we just process things very, very, very differently. And that's okay. And I have to say in the same breath that Aquafit keeps getting canceled. And I should know to check my email before I get dressed. And yesterday, I don't remember. And I got dressed and I happened to see we have a text thread with some of the swimmers and somebody said it was canceled. So while I'm saying, well, he wore the same 2 shirts all week and didn't buy new shirts, 3 times a week I go to Aquafit, and do I remember before I get dressed in the morning to check my email? No. So we all have our stuff.
Well, this is where it's like, can we develop some affection for this, right? Can this be okay? And that's, I think, inversely related to making someone wrong, or, what you're calling pushy is very much like caring. And I know you, and I know you're like, if you don't want to hear it from me, let me know and I'll make the adjustment. I think freedom and autonomy is a cherished value both of us share, right? And I just know that about you. So to me, hearing pushy or controlling, that comes from somewhere that's not you. I also want to add, though, that like families are dynamic systems. Couples are a dynamic system. It's a verb, not a noun. We're verbs, not nouns. And I know in my experience, the more that a person that I was doing some subsect of life with was carefree, the more I felt to have to be responsible, right? It's like 2 people in a rowboat. And the more one person's going to lean over one side, the more the other person's going to have to lean over the other. And I remember getting deeply resentful. Like, I don't want to have to be the only adult making sure that everything doesn't capsize all the time. Now, some of that's historical, but some of it could be very relational and in the moment too. And so again, like before you're so quick to label yourself, like it's really interesting to see the role you're playing in the dynamic, because I think sometimes we get pushed to some more extreme roles and to ask someone to be able to take some of that. Now, whether they can or do or want to, or like you said, if it's even on the radar, if it's a predisposition, like things, how often do we want to make something a habit and how to really work at it so that it's even that isn't, now it's an intra, right, dynamic of trying to develop things in ourselves or grow things. Anyway, just some thoughts about what you're saying.
Yeah, whatever it is, it feels really deeply ingrained, and it almost feels like it's out of my control to change the narrative, which runs counter to what we were going to talk about today. And I'm just going to be really transparent that if you are in the process of unmasking and trying to figure out who you are and who your identity is, I often hear people say, thank you for what you shared, by the way.
You are so welcome. I feel very secure. I know I'm appreciated here, but thank you for saying it.
You're welcome. That I hear people say, who am I? Who am I underneath the mask? And trying to figure out that identity piece, and getting an autism diagnosis, whether it's self-diagnosis or formal diagnosis, really can take your identity and just shake it around like a snow globe. What I often find helpful is, what is it that you're wanting? What are you needing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are your preferences? And so much of the masking is about making other people comfortable and having to change to fit in so that we stay safe. That if we, in certain settings, are very authentic, it may not be safe for us for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
So I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from a very narrow perspective, and there's a lot of reasons, especially if you're a person of color, unmasking may never be safe for you. And so I want to be sensitive and mindful about that. There are many situations where you don't want to unmask because it's dangerous. If we're in a situation where that's not the case, what is it that you're needing? What do you think? And you may not even be able to identify that in the moment, but after you leave a situation, can you think about what you would have wanted to say, or what you were thinking, or what you want, if they're trying to decide what to do or what to buy, do you have those preferences? And part of it is embracing who we are. And I feel like if I were able to do what I'm advising you to do, that I would be able to say, I am very specific about certain things, and certain things are very important to me. And whether it's some of these OCD tendencies that I'm just becoming aware of that I'm not super comfy with, but I'm willing to start naming it. And this need for sameness in my idea of how you do certain things. And I think in many areas that works. I think the consistency in having a plan can work. There are times where it becomes rigid and that doesn't work. But can we embrace who we are and how we're wired? And then part of what you and I are talking about is what happens when that bumps up against other people. And we often make false assumptions about how we're not okay. I'm rigid, I'm controlling, I'm opinionated. And I want that opinionated to be, I am very passionate about things. And oftentimes you'll ask me about something and it come off really strong, but you're okay with it. But I always have that awareness because I think I was socialized that everything should be calm and neutral. And that I think part of my unmasking is things really get me in a roar, that things are unfair, unjust, that I have strong feelings about. And I've been told that that's not okay and to calm down and, to don't get so worked up about stuff. But I think for me, that's part of my unmasking. And how can I be okay with that and not judge myself in contrast to my partner who has his own things that go on around being corrected, reminded. And I think sometimes how he responds makes me feel bad. And then I tell him, like, I'm not trying to be a dictator and I don't know how do I bring these things up because I'm not telling you that you're wrong. And so I think it also has to do with who we're in relationship with and their stuff and how they respond, which kind of goes back to what you were talking about. Is it the mirror or is it you? And how do we tease all that stuff out?
Yes. And I feel like, it's like buckle in. Like these are questions. Hopefully we learn to love the questions.
Yeah.
Because they just, right? They just keep coming up.
Yeah.
And this is where it's like, can this just be part of that creative process of life and growth? And like, this is how it happens. You watch young children accommodate things and their worldviews get bigger. And, so our sense of ourself, who am I? Who was I then? Who am I now? That question used to really tick me off. Who are it? Don't ask me that question. I like how you sort of enliven it, make it more specific, right? Like, what do you want? What are you feeling? It's a pretty compelling question, this, like, how do we change narratives about ourselves? Where do these narratives come from? Are they perpetuated? Of course, everything is something in relation to something else. Like, I am short in relation to most people, but then there are some situations where I'm not short, right, in relation to other people. So knowing that it's that kind of dynamic. I know one thing that's been helpful for me and helpful for some of my clients is to kind of register our experience in levels, right? So level 1 is like pure sensation without the narrative, without the story, as best you can. And this can be a really good coping mechanism sometimes too. It's like feel your feelings, but drop the story momentarily. The story is very compelling and rich but again, dynamic and hopefully changeable, and we can pull it up and be critical. Like you see young adults go through this a lot, right? Where they turn and I'm just waiting for my kids to get really critical of all of my parenting choices, knowing that I know that I did the best I could, but that's a developmental pathway that a lot of human beings take and have to go through to grapple with and make sense of themselves as they're growing out of childhood and into adulthood. And then it continues on, right? Adulthood's kind of a myth. It's kind of like, I've not arrived and hopefully I won't ever, until my time's up. But so the levels, right? This level 2 is the narrative. It's the words we use. It's captured in language, which is symbolic, which has limitations. I love that clip that Marshall Rosenberg did about English, then a lot of our languages are the language of kings, right? Who to praise, who to punish. And we look at ourselves through this very judgmental lens. And so to know that, and that's different from our pure experience, which, in the moment may be, I know I'm coming from this really caring place about asking you to put sunscreen on. And I'm also going to affirm that you have a choice whether or not you want to do that. Like, pick your own adventure. Like, we may be back getting more surgery on your face, and maybe that would have happened with or without the sunscreen. Like, we don't know, right?
Right.
So level 3 is kind of the decisions. Like, when we take our sensations, we take our stories, and what we decide to share, how we decide to make decisions. And level 3 is kind of a more active and engaged, whereas level 1 and level 2 are kind of private occurrences that we can look at intra-psychically. And just knowing where we are. And I think that the stories get kind of old, and we sort of, and to be able to make them fresh, being willing to go in that place of, again, my favorite phrase of all time, F if I know what is happening right now, but I am going to honor it, respect it. And there's new information here that hasn't been encoded into words yet.
Right.
And in parts language, you may have a part that is very caring, and you may have a part that, who doesn't have desire to control things we can't control? It's like, welcome to being human. That part, hopefully, isn't the one driving the bus all the time, because that's going to probably crash into a lot of things and be a little destructive. But, so chaperoning that part of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So my gremlin is saying I should reflect what you said, but I can't. What keeps coming up for me is every time you talk about Marshall Rosenberg and the language of kings, I think about the patriarchy. And I understand that literally at that time, kings were the ones that have power. But in my mind, I'm going, yeah, the language of those in power.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And how think about how controlling, that makes us we don't even need anybody looking over us to control us now, right? It's it's all it's really encoded and embedded, and breaking free of that, liberating ourselves from that is
yeah,
it's cool. Good work.
I think I'm all out of words. How about you?
All right, so my gremlin heard that is Patricia's telling Jen to shut up. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I feel like I have not been very responsive to things that you've said today because I'm trying to parse out what's going on with me.
Yeah.
And I have some judgment about that, and I'm trying to not.
Okay.
And I have to remember that if the tables were turned and I was showing up to support you, then I'd just be listening to reflect. And that's not the role that I have. But we've talked about this repeatedly, and this is just another one of my tropes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I'm being very lighthearted and just joking. I don't mean that for real.
Yeah. And I'm not.
What?
And I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, this is where we give each other space, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for having me today, my dear.
Sure. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, thank you.
That I could not reflect?
No, you don't. No worries. No worries.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, my friend.
All right. Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know, did it come together? Did it deliver? I actually listened to a podcast the other day. There's someone that I'm interested in having on as a guest. And so I listened. It's a podcast I already listened to, but this person happened to be a guest. And they had a title for the episode. And I'll tell you, they did not deliver on the title. It was a lovely episode, but they did not deliver. And so I think sometimes that just happens. And if you're having feelings about it, please feel free to let me know if you want to. A couple things. When Jen and I stopped recording, I think we should just keep recording when we stop, and we talked about it, that I was telling Jen that I struggle because when I'm trying to keep a cohesive podcast and Jen shares some of the things that she does, my brain tunes out and I just cannot listen. And then I have a gremlin around not responding to her and reflecting. And it doesn't bother Jen. Jen was saying, well, if I need to show up differently for you or attune to you better. And I'm like, no, I'm not asking for that. I'm just acknowledging that I have some shame and embarrassment when Jen shares something and my brain goes offline. And what I was thinking about is that when Jen and I talk either with FaceTime or with Marco Polo, this generally doesn't happen because I'm showing up receptive to what she has to say and responding, but in the role of podcast host and being unclear about what I want to share about, or even when I am clear and wanting to stay on that topic, I'm listening and fielding for information that I'm hoping will give you, the listener, a cohesive experience to listen to. But I believe this is part of my autism, that it's not uncommon for me. When my kids are around and they start talking about golf with my husband or sports, I have very little interest. And so my brain, I just check out. And it's not uncommon in certain social situations when people are talking about things that I have no interest in. It's like my brain just goes like, nope, not going to do it. But I have shame. I have shame and embarrassment, especially when this happens with Jen, and that she does a beautiful job reflecting me when we're on the podcast. But she also has the role of just showing up. I'm the one that thinks about the top. I don't mean to sound like I'm the one that's not where I'm coming from. She has the luxury of showing up and responding to whatever I say and sharing whatever comes to mind. That's, in comparison, that's very low demand to what my role is. But because I'm well socialized to be aware of reciprocity and responding and thanking her, it just doesn't always happen. And I feel a little bit exposed when y'all hear that. When Jen and I stopped recording and I said, I think I need to do some brain spotting around this belief of feeling like I'm controlling and I'm domineering and I'm bossy and I'm just too much. And she's like, do you want to do some now? Because Jen is a trained brain spotter. And if you don't know, brain spotting is similar to EMDR. It's for when we have trauma that's in our system. Brain spotting is like EMDR light. And I've done it in the past and it's been very helpful. So we did some brain spotting and I cried a ton and then got regulated and feel pretty grounded. Does that mean that this wound is gone and it won't ever come up again? No, but I can also do brain spotting on it myself. And I'm sure Jen would be willing to work with me again. So we often have these very rich discussions when we're done recording and the things that come up, and we'll see if that works or not. So if you are interested in working with Jen, and especially doing brain spotting, if you have things that you're stuck on, she is amazing. And I think she's got some room right now, at least in this moment while we're recording. So if you want to work with Jen, you can reach her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. It's in the show notes. And if you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how you're wired. You have a right to show up however you show up in the world. And if you feel like that's too much or not enough or too talkative or too loud or assertive, aggressive, picky, controlling, discriminating, quiet, thoughtful, taking your time to process, having a hard time asking for what you want, having a hard time knowing what you want, wondering who you are underneath all of this. However you're showing up in the world and whatever you're feeling is okay. All of your feelings are valid, even if they're uncomfortable, even if you don't know what they are. Who you are and how you show up in the world is a gift. You have a lot to offer the world, even if you feel like you don't. Things are hard, things are messy. Sometimes they're fun and joyful and light. All of it is okay. Who you are is okay. I don't say enough how much I appreciate each and every one of you listeners who have been here with me on the journey since the beginning. To the new listeners, this podcast wouldn't be anything without you. And I very, very, very often forget to thank you for being here and for communicating and reaching out to me and for the support. And many of you have told me how my stories resonate. My story about the pots and pans, I had a client who told me that she had pans that she bought that she hadn't used. And we talked about what it would take to try one and she could throw it out when she was done. So sometimes the things that I share that are what feel like unusual, and I sometimes have some embarrassment and shame, somebody will say like, thank you so much for sharing that. So I really do appreciate everybody and everybody that's taken the time to reach out to me. I hope you're doing okay. Just have a day. That's all you have to do. I think that's it. Have a blessed day.